Welcome to Sports Nut Central. We're nuts about sports.
We've got a special guest joining me today. This is Jessica Rusnak from CBC Daybreak in Montreal, 88.5 on the radio. And you can also catch her, of course, on Hockey Inside Out, which is a show, of course, I frequently watch all the time, covering the Montreal Canadiens on YouTube. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, Jess.
No problem.
This is, of course, the Sports Nut Central podcast. I kind of explained this to one of our previous guests, that it's a play on words with Sportsnet, but it's not Sportsnet. It is our own, so we swear. No copyright infringement here. So Justice, tell us a little bit about how your career got started in sports. We've obviously seen a lot of the story lately about ladies in journalism and kind of the conversations that have been rising out of that, and just want to kind of hear, how things started for you and just your interest to start covering sports.
So I've always been someone who loves sports. However, I was not very talented when it comes to the athletic department. I tried out for every team in high school, unfortunately never made it. My friends were always on the team, so I spent a lot of time watching sports in my household growing up. My dad's a big sports fan, even my mom, she loved the Expos, so there was always some kind of sports on TV. And then when I, started to think about what I wanted to do for a career, I always just sort of loved the environment of sports because you really don't know what can happen on any given day. So I went into communications at Concordia, and while I was doing my degree there, I started interning at Team 990, which is now known as TSN 690. And it was a great opportunity because Montreal had a junior hockey team. It was called the Montreal Juniors. It only lasted about 3 years here in Montreal, and we had the rights for their games. So I volunteered to be the beat reporter for the Montreal Juniors. I wasn't paid for the first half of the year, and then finally I was able to be put on the payroll, and then that led to other opportunities that someone wasn't able to go to, an Alouettes practice. They didn't have a reporter one day to go to the Habs because of scheduling, and I was available to do it. And then, different opportunities were able to, arise. And I stayed at TSN 690 for about 8 years. And then I left and I went and worked at Sportsnet 590, The Fan, for about a year and a half. I was helping produce the morning show at that point. And then there was an opening back in Montreal on CBC's morning radio show, Daybreak. They needed a sports reporter, and I came back to Montreal, and that's what I've been doing now.
So how's that been? Because you were at TSN 690. I guess I'll ask you about that experience first, because, those guys are great, and we don't hear a lot of female voices out of that channel. So, I mean, were you the only lady there at that time? And just how was that whole experience for you?
Well, Mitch Melnick, who hosts the Drive show there, has done a good job of, having a woman on his show for the most part. And he had Andy Bennett when I first started. And I had her there to kind of, show me what it's like to cover the Montreal Canadiens. I got to shadow her at a Habs game. And it was really cool because as soon as we walked into the Bell Center, the first person we saw was Jean Beliveau. And he said hello to us. I said hi to him. He was so nice in that moment. I was like, yes, this is absolutely what I want to do. And then Amanda Steins began working at TSN 690 as well around the same time I started. She now works for the New Jersey Devils. And so there was a nice culture there that there was 3 women working there. Unfortunately that there wasn't that many opportunities for full-time jobs at that moment. So we all kind of looked around at different opportunities. But I would really like for TSN 690 to kind of continue that tradition of having a woman on air and having that woman voice. And I think sometimes it's difficult when you don't kind of already have a woman there to, maybe give the opportunity to someone else that they might not feel comfortable. They might feel a little bit intimidated walking into kind of like a boys club. And I found that was really nice to have your own kind of little group there. But that being said, the people at TSN 690, they're great. Absolutely love working with them. Keep in touch with them still to this day. But I really would love for them to find room to have a woman on air.
I want to talk to you about an experience you had with current assistant coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that's Jacques Martin. Years ago, you had an interaction with him that I don't think, based on the way I read it, was that pleasant. He accused you of basically not doing your research when you had what your colleague Stu Cowan called a legitimate question. So would you be able to just talk about that experience?
Yeah, that was really I had just started taking over covering the Canadiens for TSN 690. It was kind of my beat at that point. And it was beginning of the season. Their big off-season acquisition was Eric Cole, and he was supposed to help them out. They put a lot of money into him, and he was never on the power play. And they were struggling to score goals, and they put out Matthew Darche instead of him, who was, a fourth liner making league minimum, and it never really made any sense as to why you got this big free agent to come here and you're not using him on the power play when you're supposed to. So after the game, I asked him, because it was quite a few games that he was not getting many power play opportunities, and they lost that game. And I said, what's the mindset behind having a guy like Eric Cole on the bench and Matthew Darche out on the ice? Now, basically, Jacques Martin said the reason behind that is because Eric Cole only scored 3 power play goals last season, but Matthew Darche has only scored 3 power play goals his entire career. So him trying to use that as his reasoning, and it was, it wasn't the most pleasant exchange. It wasn't, that's for sure. But I think it was kind of good, because you have to ask questions like that. And it now pushes me to always say, what, it's never comfortable, criticizing a coach, but there's a way to do it. You have to do it professionally. And, but that's your job, is to go there and get the answers for it. And it was really nice, because afterwards I was a little bit like, ooh, did I do the right thing? And all the other reporters in Montreal came to me and they're like, what, you asked the right question, you did it in a polite way, don't worry about it. This is just part of the job, that sometimes, they're not happy and you take it, but you can't take it personally.
Was that just an issue of maybe you were a newer face in town? Because Stu even said himself that if that was RDS's Chantal Maccabi, that exchange may not have gone the same way.
For sure. I was 24 years old at that point. Like I said before, I was covering the Canadiens, but not on a regular basis. So he wasn't too familiar with me. And so I was a new face there. I was young. And I think, yeah, that's it. That if it was maybe a different reporter that asked that he might have responded in a different way. But that's kind of your way of, earning your stripes in the industry, is that sometimes you have to kind of go through these little moments like that, and then you just kind of move forward.
It's one of the first things you learn in broadcasting school: thick skin.
Yeah.
So that's true. One interesting thing I found out about you was that I am a Niagara Falls native currently. It's where I was raised, but we're both born in Pointe Claire, Jessica. So that I found very interesting. So that's kind of neat.
And I love the city of Pointe Claire. Like, my boyfriend often jokes that I'm like the #1 fan of Pointe Claire, because I'm always talking about all these events that they have and things that they do for the community. And I think it's just such a great place. So that's great that you also are someone who has a connection to Pointe Claire.
I mean, let's be honest. We really just say Montreal because it sounds cooler.
Yes.
But yeah, on the birth certificate is Pointe Claire, and I even had it recently. Or over here, I was going to show it to you. I'm like, I think she'll just take my word for it. So the Hockey Inside Out show obviously gained quite a following over recent years on YouTube here. You guys have a chance. We've got Stu Cowan from the Gazette. We got Pat Hickey, yourself, Adam Susser, who's hilarious and a great host. I'm curious to see, will we ever get a chance to see some behind the scenes clips of you guys joking around before and after the show? Because I think there's got to be some good stuff there.
Oh, there definitely is. And sometimes we're like, oh, too bad that this is not the stuff that can kind of be on air, especially when we kind of take our break for them to we film it in blocks kind of. And since we have also started filming it at Madison's, a restaurant downtown Montreal, they're the sponsor of the show. So sometimes there's little glitches that happen because the people who work at the restaurant are coming in around the time that we're starting to film to set up for lunchtime. So some lights will go on when, they have the lighting out perfectly. But it's a really great show. It's fun to work on, those bringing different ideas, joking about things, especially when Chris Nyland was on the show. He would always have some good stories from back in his day when he was playing, and it's always super enjoyable. But yeah, maybe they have to do a kind of like a blooper reel, or as you said, the behind the scenes stuff that couldn't make it into the episode.
I just got that sense from watching you guys even today again, and just that camaraderie and chemistry you guys must have. So it'd be fun to see that. Just putting it out there, guys. But we're in the middle of a playoff series, play-in series, whatever you want to call it. The NHL doesn't seem to want to call it playoffs just yet.
Yeah.
Today, this may date this episode a little bit for a second. We're hoping to air it tomorrow, but today is Sidney Crosby's birthday, and it's Game 4. And I thought, this is the perfect time for the Sidney Crosby factor to make a statement in this series, is it not?
Yeah, for sure. It's his birthday. For sure, his birthday wish is probably winning this game and forcing a Game 5, and then eventually going on to go further in the playoffs and win the Stanley Cup. But it's been pretty incredible. I did not think that the Canadiens were going to give the Pittsburgh Penguins a run for their money like they have. But I think because it's such a unique experience that no one has ever gone through a time like this, where it wasn't a regular off season. They didn't have access to gyms or other players to necessarily train with for a long period of time. And different, teams are reacting differently from it. And I hate when, GMs say or players say, as soon as you make the playoffs, anything can happen. But I think that is really the right way to describe the 2020 playoff season, or the NHL's return to play plan, that really anything can happen.
Speaking of GMs, listened in on a conference call recently with yourself and your colleagues with Jeff Molson, owner of the Montreal Canadiens. And your question was regarding Marc Bergevin and Jeff Molson's continued confidence in him. You were curious as to why that was. Why was that a question that you had on your mind?
Just because Jeff Molson says that he is an owner who wants his team to win. He wants to get the Montreal Canadiens back to their glory days, where they're seen as a dominant dynasty team in the NHL. But they really haven't done much lately. That they were, on the way to miss the playoffs once again. And I just don't understand how you can have confidence in a general manager who is not leading you, any further than you were the year before. You still have a lot of holes in your lineup for players who could down the line help you out to win a Stanley Cup. And I think the major thing too is your goaltender, Carey Price. He's also born in August. He's going to be 33 years old. And yes, goalies can play until, their late 30s, but the time is now. If he's 33, if he has another 5 years, that'd be great. But you can't see him, necessarily playing until he's 42. And he said that he wants to win a cup. So I just don't necessarily know if Marc Bergevin is the right person to lead this team to be considered a Stanley Cup contender. If you look at a lot of his first round draft picks over the years, they haven't panned out to be, an impactful player on this team. And his major thing was, he said, building through the draft. And this year's draft, whenever it's held, they have quite a few draft picks. And these could be the group that could help you, but I just don't know if there's people in place on the Canadiens that can help develop them.
Well, it's certainly, to be debated as long as we've known. And it's been a long run for Marc, and it's time to have the chips on the table and see if he's going to follow through. So that will remain to be seen, of course. But back into broadcasting, and yourself being a woman in broadcasting, there can be kind of an undertone or even an overtone at times of sexism and things like that. So would you just be able to speak to that a little bit, and also even just give advice to any ladies that are thinking about pursuing sports broadcast as a career such as yourself?
Well, I find it just hilarious that it's the year 2020 and people are still bothered that there are women working in sports and are doing really well at their job. Like if you look at the NBA, Doris Burke is probably one of their best analysts, so what's the difference? Like why is this such a big problem for people? And it's just funny because I don't usually look at the comments under the Hockey Inside Out show, just because sometimes they're negative for no real reason. But I happened to today, and someone wrote underneath, who's this girl on the show and what makes her qualified to be talking about this? The internet nowadays, anyone can go ahead and have an opinion. And it's like, if you're going to criticize me, first learn my name. Also, maybe do some research. I've been covering the Canadiens for the last 10 years. And besides Rick Green, who used to play in the NHL, he has the exact knowledge that only a few people do, that many of the other reporters never played in the NHL. Pat Hickey didn't play in the NHL, but he had no problem having him sit there and give his opinion on it. I also get criticized a lot for my voice because I work in radio, that it's too high pitched, so they don't want to hear that. Or if you make the slightest mistake, that people tend to jump on you quicker than I think if a man made that mistake, that they might just say, oh, it was a slip of the tongue, that kind of thing. But my advice to women who want to get into it is, you can't let that bother you. It's hard to ignore it, but as years progress and you feel a little bit more comfortable with what you're doing, you just kind of tune it out and laugh about it, and just think, like, the most important thing is, do you have the respect of your colleagues? Do you have the respect of your boss? Do you have the respect of the players that you're interviewing? And if all that is yes, then you're doing a good job, and anyone can, give their opinion if they like you or not. But at the end of the day, that's just one person's opinion. And usually those who do have a more positive opinion don't necessarily take the time to write things. So that's what I always kind of think.
Fantastic advice. Absolutely fantastic advice. Now, you mentioned a few questions ago here, your boyfriend. I thought I saw you're engaged. I'm not trying to correct you.
Yeah, we are engaged. I just kind of find it funny calling him my fiance. I feel like it's kind of like pretentious in a way, but that was one nice thing that happened throughout 2020.
Well, I have to ask you, just out of curiosity, how long did it take you to answer? Because it took my wife about 10 seconds, and I was freaking out because I'm like, hon, I need an answer here.
Well, it was really fun because we went for a walk, and on the walk, he's like, oh, hold on one second, I have a rock in my shoe. And he walks towards a tree to kind of lean on the tree to get the rock out. But there was all kinds of benches to the left of us. And I was like, well, why don't you go sit on the bench and take off your shoe? And then he goes down on one knee, and I was like, oh my God, like, is he gonna propose? But then there was a part of me that's like, maybe he's just going down awkwardly and I don't want to get too excited. And then he pulled the ring out of his pocket and asked me, and it was just kind of one of those things that I'm like, oh my God, is this actually happening? I had a big smile on my face. So it didn't take me that long to say yes. It was just, I didn't want to think he was proposing when he actually wasn't. So I took a few seconds to make sure that that was the actual situation that was happening.
So he had the rock in his pocket, not his shoe.
Yeah, not in his shoe.
Awesome. Well, Jess, this was fun. My Sportsnet colleagues would, of course, have loved to have been here today. We're trying to make this a full-time gig. We're taking strides to get there, but we would love to have you back on the show. So thanks so much for chatting with me here today.
No problem. Anytime. It was a lot of fun.
Sports Nut Central. We're nuts about sports.